Hello everybody, my name is Zach with Overrated Gamers. Today we're going to be doing another Commander deck tech. Today's Commander is Xenagos, God of Revels. He's 3 red-green for a legendary enchantment creature with the creature type of God. He is indestructible, he's a 6/5. As long as your devotion to red and green is less than 7, he is not a creature. For those of you who did not play during Theros block, devotion refers to the mana symbols on the top of your card. For Xenagos it's red and green, so as long as the total mana symbols and the permanents you have on the field is less than 7 for red or green, then he is not a creature. At the beginning of combat on your turn, he gives another target creature you control haste and plus X until end of turn, where X is that creature's power. He allows you to get to swing with really large creatures. A few of the creatures in here can one-shot people with his ability. His strengths are obviously makes your creatures large, gets through a lot of damage. Xenagos is hard to remove because he is rarely ever a creature. If he is, he's indestructible. If he's not, he can only be killed by cards that remove enchantments from the game. First up, our land base. We run 10 mountains, 12 forests, I could run 5 fetch lands over 3. At the moment I don't feel like picking up $50 Zendikar fetch lands. Maybe eventually I'll get them later. The ones we do have are the Khans fetch lands, Wooded Foothills, Bloodstained Mire, and Windswept Heath. After that we have our 3 dual lands. We have Taiga, Stomping Ground, and Cinder Glade. We have Command Tower, taps for any color, equal to your commander's color identity. Ancient Tomb makes 2 colorless mana, and then deals 2 damage to you. Next up we have Gemstone Caverns. It's a legendary land. If it's in your opening hand and you're not playing first, you can begin the game with it in play if you exile a card from your hand, and then it comes into play with a luck counter on it. Normally it only taps for colorless. If it came in with a luck counter on it, it can tap for any color. After that we have High Market. It adds 1 colorless mana to your mana pool, and you can sacrifice a creature to gain a life. This card is useful if an opponent tries to take control of your creature, or if they try to exile it with Path to Exile or Swords to Plowshares. If you hit it, if you sacrifice an Eldrazi, it'll shuffle your deck. You can kill your own Genesis with it, so you can start paying 3 at your upkeep to bring creatures back from your graveyard to your hand. And it also allows you to sacrifice Woodfall Primus to get a second trigger. Woodfall Primus, when it comes into play, destroys a non-creature permanent, and when it dies, if it has no -1 counters on it, it comes into play with a -1/-1 counter on it. So it'll allow you to bring it back in for another enters the battlefield effect. We have Dryad Arbor. You can get it with Green Sun Zenith early on to get another land out. It counts as another creature for Craterhoof Behemoth, and you can discard it. To Survival of the Fittest. It's a pretty good utility card. We have Yavimaya Hollow. It makes colorless mana. You can pay a green and tap it to regenerate a creature. Very useful against board wipes, or if an opponent blocks your creature and kills it. Anything like that. We have Rogue's Passage, another land that makes colorless mana. You can pay 4 and tap it to make a creature unblockable for the turn. So it's very nice to get your Malignus through an opponent's blockers to one-shot them. It allows you to get past an opponent that has non-green, non-black creatures if you have sort of Feast and Famine and you really want to get your trigger off of it, so you can untap your lands. We have Kessig Wolf Run. Makes colorless. Pay X, a green, and a red to tap it. Give one of your creatures +X/+O until end of turn. It's really nice, especially when it's combined with Xenagos. It can allow your creatures to become really big. Even buffing a creature with 3 power, well, it buffs it to 5, and then Xenagos brings it to 10. That's a pretty nice card. Allows you to get past blockers as well with the trample effect that it gives. A lot of this deck is about swinging very big, very hard, very fast. We have Soul Ring, makes 2 colorless. Mana Vault taps, makes 3 colorless, doesn't untap during your untap unless you pay 4, and it deals 1 damage to you if it doesn't untap. Once again, in this deck I usually also only use it once. Occasionally I will pay the 4 and untap it sometimes. Xenagos isn't quite as all-in as Captain Sisay is. Burgeoning, whenever an opponent plays a land, you can put a land from your hand into play. Now this deck does run 36 lands. Generally this is good if you have 3 or more lands in your opening hand. We have Exploration. Same thing with Burgeoning, you want to have at least 3 lands in your hand if you're playing this, preferably 4 for Exploration. That way by turn 2 you can have 4 lands out, get really far ahead of your opponents. It lets you play 1 additional land on each of your turns. Birds of Paradise, 1 green, flying, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Search for Tomorrow. Now this is a 3-drop, but you can use what's called Suspend on it. You pay 1 green, remove it from the game with 2 time counters on it. Each turn remove 1. When the last is removed you can play it for free. So generally it's a nice turn 1 search for a land. The land search for a basic land. It does come into play untapped. So I really like it. It's essentially a ramp on turn 1. It just takes 2 turns to come in. Talisman of Impulse, 2 mana artifact, produces colorless or a red and a green and deals 1 damage to you. We have Sakura-Tribe Elder. He's rampant growth on a 1/1 creature. You just have to sacrifice him and he will search for a basic land and put it into play tapped. Nature's Lore, it gets a forest into play. It comes in untapped. Now this can get any of the 3 duels that we have in the deck. We have Rampant Growth, search for a basic land, put it into play tapped, then shuffle your library. Gruul Signet, 2 mana, 1 in tap, add red and green to your mana pool. This one's pretty nice if you started out with, say, an Ancient Tomb and you didn't get the green mana you were looking for, or you don't have green and red. In the worst case scenario, you can still drop the Gruul Signet, pay a colorless, and get both of those colors. Technically the Talisman of Impulse can also get you those colors, but the Gruul Signet does get you both of them if for some reason you needed the red and the green on the same turn, or it's just... I prefer this card to the Talisman. I really like the Signets. We have Cultivate, search your library for up to 2 basic lands, put 1 into play and 1 into your hand. Kodama's Reach does the same thing as Cultivate. We have Harrow, 2 and a green, as an additional cost, sacrifice a land. Search your library for 2 basic lands, put them into play. They come in untapped. Harrow is an instant, so you can leave mana up if you think you might need to Crossing Grip or Beast within something of an opponent's. And if you don't, you can play Harrow at the end of the turn, or you can just play it on your turn. Skyshroud Claim. It's Nature's Lore, but it costs twice as much and gets you 2 forests into play untapped. Explosive Vegetation. It's twice the effect of Rampant Growth. It gets you 2 basic lands into play tapped. We have Solemn Simulacrum, or as a lot of us like to call him, Sad Robot. When he enters the battlefield, you can search for a basic land, put it into play tapped, and when he dies, he draws you a card. Next up are our tutors. We have Worldly Tutor. It's a green instant. Search your library for a creature card, reveal it to all players, put it on, shuffle your library, then put it on top. Crop Rotation. Once again, this is one of my favorite cards. 1 green, instant, sacrifice a land, search your library for land and put it into play. This one's not quite as much of a combat trick unless you're going to unless you're going to get a high market with it and sacrifice one of your creatures if they're trying to take control of it or exile it. Generally in this deck it's more of a toolbox card. It gets you your Kessig Wolf Run or your Rogue's Passage so that you can kill somebody. Green Sun Zenith, X and a green, search for a green creature with converted mana cost X or less, put it into play, and then you shuffle it back in. I really like that it's a reusable tutor. This deck has a lot more green creatures than Captain's Essay, so it's a bit more useful in this deck. Survival of the Fittest, 1 and a green, pay a green. Discard a creature, search your library for a creature, reveal it to all players to put it into your hand. Birthing Pod, 3 and a green, pay 1 and a green to sacrifice a creature, search for a creature with a converted mana cost equal to that creature's cost plus 1. In this deck it's kind of nice to have because you can sacrifice an Avenger of Zendikar after it's come out and brought out about 7 or so creatures on your following, and then you can bring out a Craterhoof on your following turn, and generally that's enough damage to kill at least 2 if not 3 players depending on what else you have on the board. We have Defense of the Heart. This card is 3 and a green. During your upkeep, if an opponent controls 3 or more creatures, you sacrifice Defense of the Heart, search your library for up to 2 creatures and bring them into play. Generally this card will either get removed when it comes out, or if you're playing it while they have 3 creatures, and if it does go off, at that point you are either extremely ahead or Xenagos is out and you're able to get Blightsteel Colossus and another value card and kill at least 1 player off. We have Chord of Calling, X and 3 green. You can tap your creatures to cast the spell. Each one you tap while casting reduces either 1 colorless or 1 mana of that creature's color. So if you tap a green creature, it covers one of the green mana symbols in it. You search your library for a creature and put it into play with converted mana cost X or less. And one of the most hated cards in EDH, Tooth and Nail. It's a sorcery, 7 and 2 green. Choose one, search your library for 2 creature cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, or put 2 creature cards from your hand into play. It has an Entwine cost. Entwine is an old Mirrodin effect. You can pay 2 and choose both effects. So you search for 2 creatures and bring them into play. Generally the 2 cards are Avenger of Zendikar, Craterhoof Behemoth, and then Swinging for Game. It's the most common thing you get, but you could also get Blightsteel Colossus, you can get Eldrazi Titans, you can get Moltensteel Dragon, which is capable of killing an opponent if your life total is pretty high, Malignus. We have our draw effects. First one is Sylvan Library. It's an enchantment for 1 and a green. You can draw 2 additional cards during your turn. But you have to put at least 2 cards you drew this turn back, or pay 4 life for each card you didn't put back. Effectively, it allows you to at least Sensei's Divining Top for free every turn. If you don't like what's there, you can get rid of it with fetch lands, or you can just take 8 damage and draw the cards. If you like some of the cards there and they can help you get ahead, then you can just draw some of them and take the damage. You do want to be careful with not taking too much damage in this deck if you plan to play Moltensteel Dragon. We'll explain Moltensteel Dragon in a little bit, but he allows you to pay life to make himself larger, and when Xenagos is out, and if you're able to pay 32 life, you can kill another player off. Hunter's Insight. It's 2 and a green instant. Choose a creature you control. When it deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker this turn, draw that many cards. With most of the creatures being at least 3 3s or 5 5s in this deck, you're going to draw at least 6 cards generally with this card. I've drawn as many as 40 cards with this before. Harmonize, 2 and 2 green, draws 3 cards. It's just a standard green draw spell. Nothing really that special about it, but it is pretty good in the deck. Momentous Fall is 2 and a green. As an additional cost to play it, you have to sacrifice a creature. You draw cards equal to the sacrificed creatures. power, and then gain life equal to its toughness. Generally you swing at someone, and then either if your life is low or if they kill it in response, you can sacrifice it to Momentous Paul, draw a bunch of cards, gain a bunch of life. It's also useful if you've attacked with your Moltensteel, paid most of your life, and someone tries to kill it. You can sacrifice it to gain that life back and draw a bunch of cards. Really useful. It's a neat little combat trick, and it gets you quite a few cards. We have Greater Good, 2 and 2 green enchantment, sacrifice a creature, draw cards equal to its power, then you have to discard 3 cards. Once again, this is a card that we can just put on the table, and then if someone kills our creature while we're swinging, we can sacrifice it to Greater Good, draw 3 cards. Then we do have to discard 3. Generally, since you're drawing, as I've said, at least 6 or more cards off of your creatures during combat, it's usually still worth running the Greater Good because your creatures are so large. We have our removal spells, our non-creature ones anyway. Our first one up is Beast Within, destroys a permanent, its controller gets a 3/3 green beast into play. It is 2 a green and it's an instant. This is one of my favorite green cards. It kills anything on the board, does it at instant speed. The downside, your opponent gets a 3/3. Not that much of a downside if you're killing a 20/20 creature, if you're killing off a combo piece, or if you just need it to keep them from getting really far ahead in the game. Gross and Grip, 2 and a green instant, destroys an artifact or enchantment, and it has split second as long as it's on the stack. Players can't play spells or activated abilities unless they are mana abilities. This card is really useful for stopping opponents' combos. If they're, say, going to, if they play something like a Hive Mind, or if they play something such as Mind Over Matter and Temple Bell, you can respond to them playing the Temple Bell by killing their Mind Over Matter, or vice versa. It can also kill stuff like Soul Ring if an opponent is starting to get really far ahead, or Gilded Lotus. Generally you use it to stop combos, but it's useful for all kinds of removal, and it can't be countered, so that's always pretty nice. We have Vandal Blast, 1 red sorcery, destroy an artifact you don't control. Overload, pay 4 and a red. You can cast it for its overload cost. If you do, you destroy each artifact you don't control. Really nice for knocking out opponents' threats, knocking out all of their mana sources if they're an artifact deck. They tend to be mostly artifact mana sources. It's just a nice card to have in the deck. Sometimes you just don't want your opponent to have nice things. We have Oblivion Stone, 3 mana artifact, 4 mana tap it, put a fate counter on target permanent, 5 mana and tap it, sacrifice it, destroy each non-land permanent without a fate counter on it, then remove all fate counters from all permanents. Now I chose this card as a board wipe in here over Allah's Dust because Xenagos survives Oblivion Stone, whereas he does die to Allah's Dust, and he can start getting a bit hard to cast if he starts, even if he dies just once, he can be a bit hard to start casting. Our utility cards, we have Strionic Resonator, 2 mana, pay 2 mana and tap it, copy a triggered ability you control. You can choose new targets for the copy. Triggered abilities use the words when, whenever, at. They are different from activated abilities, which you have to pay a cost for. It's really good with Xenagos' ability that allows you to basically quadruple a creature's attack. You can also copy your enters the battlefield abilities, so you can copy Craterhoof's ability, you can copy Woodfall Primus, you can copy Reclamation Sage. It's a very powerful card in Xenagos. It's usually just used to make a creature much larger after Xenagos has increased its attack. Sword of Feast and Famine, 3 mana artifact equipment. Its equip cost is 2. Equipped creature gets +2/+2, has protection from black and green. When equipped creature deals damage to a player, that player discards a card and you untap all lands you control. Let's be honest with this card, you don't care about them discarding the card. It's generally just there for you to untap lands when your creature connects with them, allowing you to play more large creatures, occasionally more ramp. Sometimes you want a creature and then you want to ramp afterward, or just other stuff like that. It is also one of the 2 equipments in here that we can get with Godo. We have Stranglehold. Opponents can't search libraries, and if a player would begin an extra turn, it skips that extra turn. It's 3 and a red for an enchantment. It's very useful for shutting down things like Narset, or any other deck that tries to take a lot of extra turns. It hits decks like Captain Sisay so that they can't search. It even stops your opponent's fetch lands from being used. So I have that in there to slow opponents down so that I can knock other people out of the game. We have Sneak Attack, 3 and a red enchantment. Pay a red, put a creature from your hand onto the battlefield. It gains haste. You do have to sacrifice it at the beginning of the end step. This card has a few uses in here. You can either just bring out a Blightsteel after Xenagos has been out and just straight up kill somebody. You can bring a creature in at the beginning of a player's end step. So the last player before you can put it in during their end step, and it'll stay there during your turn because the wording on the card says beginning of end step. The middle of their end step, the beginning has already passed, so it'll stay there on your turn. You could then drop a second creature on your turn. The first creature already has haste from Sneak Attack, so the other creature can then gain haste from Xenagos. You can also bring in Woodfall Primus on their turn. Woodfall Primus will come in, eat a non-land permanent. Woodfall Primus will die. Woodfall Primus will come back and stay back because Persist brings it back and it counts as a new object. We have Garruk Primal Hunter, one of the few planeswalkers I run outside of Super Friends EDH. He is 2 and 3 green. +1 gives a 3/3 green breach, creates a 3/3 green beast. -3, draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. -6, put a 6/6 green worm into play for each land you control. He comes in with 3 loyalty. I generally kill him right away to draw a lot of cards off of a large creature. I have never used his ult. I have used his plus and then minused him on the following turn on occasion. We have Batterskull, 5 mana equipment. It has an ability known as Living Weapon. When it comes into play, it creates a 0/0 germ and then attaches to it. Equipped creature gets +4/+4, has Vigilance and Lifelink. The equip cost is 5. You can also pay 3 to return Batterskull to your hand. So it's something else that Godo can get. It gives you some life back if you've paid a lot of life to either Moltensteel or Sylvan Library. And it's just a generally strong equipment to have overall. Vigilance with Godo also allows you to attack more. We'll go into Godo in a little bit. Now we get into our creatures. Our first one is Lotus Cobra, 1 and a green for a 2/1. He has Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you can add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. It does allow for a turn 3 Xenagos if you play out a fetch land on turn 3, because 2 lands have entered. He's just in there mostly just to get a bit ahead of your opponents, or so that you can play more cards on your turn. If you want to just play a bunch of ramp spells, he allows you to chain a few of them together early on. Later in the game he doesn't really do too much, but he's pretty good early on. We have Genesis Hydra. He's X and 2 green. When you cast him, reveal the top X cards of your library. You can put a non-land permanent with converted mana cost X or less from among them onto the battlefield. and then you shuffle the rest into your library, he comes in with X +1/+1 counters on him. Even if he is countered, you still get his cast trigger. So it's kind of nice to get a free card even if he is countered. He can be a big beater. There's a few uses. He's mostly just nice card advantage. Generally, you do want to play him for at least 6 or 7, though, since that's where the mana cost of most of our big creatures are. We have Reclamation Sage, 2 and a green for a 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, you can destroy an artifact or enchantment. It's just a nice removal card on a body. We have Eternal Witness, 1 and 2 green for a 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, you can return a card from your graveyard to your hand. As I just knock everything over. We have Oracle of Mul Daya, 3 and a green for a 2/2. To play an additional land on each of your turns. You do play with the top card of your library revealed. You can play the top card of your library if it is a land card. So it's mostly just in there for the extra land drops. It's kind of nice to sometimes know what you have coming up, even if your opponents can see it too. We have Genesis. At the beginning of your upkeep, if he is in your graveyard, you can pay 2 and a green. If you do, return a creature from your graveyard to your hand. He's something that you can pitch to Survival of the Fittest, and you can also high market him. Occasionally I've swung with it. We have Malignus. He is one of the cards I have in here to do what's known as one-shotting people. He's 3 and 2 red. His power and toughness are equal to the highest life total among your opponents, rounded up. And damage that will be dealt to him can't be prevented. So if an opponent has a fog effect, it will not work on Malignus. They can still block him, but they cannot play cards that prevent him from dealing damage. And then Xenagos will double him, so if a player's life total is 40, his attack is 20, but it goes up to 40 when Xenagos doubles it. Realm Seekers is 4 and 2 green. Comes into play with X counters on it, where X is the number of cards in all players' hands. You can pay 2 and a green to remove a +1 counter from him, to search your library for a land, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Once again, another creature that comes in very large. Generally, he comes in with at least 10 power, and that's usually when players have very few cards in their hand. If you're playing against blue players, he can come in with as many as 20 or 30, and then he's swinging for 40 or 60 at someone. You can also pay 2 and a green to search for a land, so on your following turn you can search for a Kessig Wolf Run, give him trample, swing at someone with him with Xenagos. I like him, he's pretty good. Bane of Progress, 4 and 2 green. When it enters the battlefield, destroy all artifacts and enchantments. He gets a +1/+1 counter for each permanent destroyed this way. So he doesn't hit your Xenagos, because Xenagos is indestructible. Destroys a lot of your opponent's artifacts, their threats. For some of them, maybe sources of mana. And then he gets bigger for... He gets exponentially larger for however many he's destroyed. Rurikthar the Unbound, 4 a red and a green for a 6/6 with Vigilance and Reach. When he does have to attack every turn if able. Whenever a player casts a non-creature spell, he deals 6 damage to that player. The worst thing that happens if you play this is an opponent plays a Path to Exile and takes 6 damage. Now he does hit you as well, so if you're trying to get out a Sword of Feast and Famine or something like that, you probably want to play it first, and then play the Rurikthar. The Vigilance is relevant. We'll explain that a little more once we get to Godo. We have Hellkite Tyrant, 4 and 2 red for a 6/5 flying trample. When he deals damage to combat damage to a player, gain control of all artifacts that player controls. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 20 more artifacts, you win the game. I have never won the game with his having 20 artifacts ability. I have, however, won the game because he's stolen really good equipments or other artifacts from my opponents. Now he does have flying. He can also steal things like an opposing Blightsteel Colossus. We have Godo. I've mentioned him on a few of the other cards. He is a legendary human barbarian. When he comes into play, you can search your library for an equipment card and put it into play, so you can get either Sword of Feast and Famine or Batterskull. When he attacks for the first time each turn, untap him and all samurai you control. After this phase, there's another combat phase. Now, Rurik Thar has Vigilance, and Batterskull has Vigilance on its own when it's attached to the Germ token or when you attach it to a creature. So those cards could attack again as well. And you can also activate Xenagos' ability a second time because it's at the beginning of combat. So Godo does give you 2 Xenagos triggers during combat. And then he also tutors out your equipments. This is a strong card. 2 combats is always nice. Getting your equipments out of the deck. And we have up to 2 Vigilance creatures in the deck that can also attack again on their own. Worst case scenario is Godo swings for 6, because Xenagos doubled him once. Godo then swings again for 12. Generally, if you bring out the Sword of Feast and Famine, it can be a bit more than that. If you have the mana to attach it, in which case you could swing for 10. And then you could swing for 20. So Godo on his own with a sword attached can swing for 30 just on the turn he comes out. Duplicant, 6 mana 2/4 artifact creature. When he comes into play, you can remove a non-token creature from the game, and he gets that creature's toughness, power, and creature types. He's just in here as a strong removal spell. If he hits something big, like a 10/10 creature, like an Ulamog, a Kozilek, then he can do a lot of damage to the opponent's to an opponent. But usually he's just in there for just a nice kind of a 2-for-1 because he exiles that creature, then you get a creature. So it's always nice to have, and you can tutor for him. Moltensteel Dragon, I've mentioned this card a few times before. But he's 4 and 2 Phyrexian. Phyrexian mana is mana you can either pay 2 life or pay the color of. For him it's either red or 2 Phyrexian. He has flying, he's a 4/4, and you can pay Phyrexian mana to give him +1/+0 until end of turn. If Xenagos is out, you can give him +16 by paying 32 life. He'll become a 20, he'll have 20 attack. You can then double it with Xenagos to 40. And usually you can kill someone with that. It's very risky if someone has, if they have mana open and they remove it. But as I've said, sometimes it's worth it, and sometimes it's just fun to go all in. That's what EDH is about, just having fun. We have Balefire Dragon, 5 and 2 red for a 6/6 flying. When it deals combat damage to a player, deals that much damage to each creature that player controls. Worst case, it's just swinging for 6, all their creatures take 6, and it very likely kills them all. Best case, it hits an opponent for 12, and it most likely has killed everything, unless for some reason they have very large creatures out, or they are indestructible like Ulamog. We have Avenger of Zendikar. Oh, as I bumped my camera there. He is 5 and 2 green for a 5/5. When he comes into play, you put a 0/1 plant creature token into the battlefield for each land you control. Landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on each plant you control. He's generally good even without the Craterhoof coming out to kill everybody. He creates plants, they get exponentially bigger, especially if you have a fetch land out. They start getting +1, then your next turn they have 2, and then 3. And then you can just beat people down with even just the plant tokens. We have Craterhoof Behemoth, 5 and 3 green for 5/5 haste. When he enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. Something to keep in mind is he does not grant haste to your other creatures, but he himself has haste. So if you have like 10 other creatures out, and he comes out, then he gets +11 because he includes himself, so that's 16 power just on its own. He's a very good finisher. He's one of the 2 cards you get when you Tooth and Nail normally. You can also just Birthing Pod away your Avenger of Zendikar into Craterhoof the turn after he's come out. We have Woodfall Primus, 5 and 3 green for a 6/6 trample. When it enters the battlefield, destroy a non-creature permanent, so land, artifact, enchantment, planeswalkers. Yes, persist when he dies. If he had no -1/-1 counters on him, he comes back into play with the -1/-1 counter on him, and you get his enters the battlefield effect again. We have Terrestodon, 6 and 3 green for a 9/9. When it comes into play, destroy up to 3 non-creature permanents. For each permanent put into a graveyard this way, its controller gets a 3/3 green elephant creature token. It's a nice card because of how versatile it is. Occasionally I've destroyed a few of my lands or other permanents of mine to get the 3/3 elephants, so I can beat people down on the following turn. Sometimes there's only one permanent you want to kill because you don't want to give people the elephants, so it can eat just one permanent if you want it to. You can just hit 2 things if there's only 2 things you're worrying about, or you can go ahead and hit all 3. So it's very nice, versatile. It's a 9/9. With Xenagos becomes an 18/18. We have Vorinclex. He's 6 and 2 green for a 7/6 trample. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type it produced. When an opponent taps a land for mana, that land doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. It's a nice card to play normally, but you could also pay 1 red and bring it out with Sneak Attack, doubling your mana for the turn, getting a 7/6 trample haste out on that turn as well, and then just playing some other big creatures. Yes, he would die, but I have occasionally done it to play a large creature while Xenagos has been out and then just swing at someone. Or you can just play him normally. He's a nice big body, he gives you extra mana. This deck draws a lot of cards, so there'll be plenty of things to do with that mana. And what would a face-beating deck be without 2 Eldrazi? Our first one is the original Kozilek, 10 mana 12/12. When you cast it, draw 4 cards. Annihilator 4. Whenever it attacks, defending player sacrifices 4 permanents. This is before they block. And when he's put into your graveyard, you shuffle your entire graveyard back into your library. And then we have the original Ulamog, 11 mana 10/10. When you cast him, you destroy target permanent. Annihilator 4. He's indestructible, and he has the same effect as Ulamog, where if he would be put into a graveyard, he shuffles your entire graveyard into your library. Now that also includes if you discard them for whatever reason, they shuffle back in, and their cast triggers happen unless they counter the cast trigger, in which case they'd have to play 2 cards to stop both of their triggers from occurring. And finally we have Blightsteel Colossus, 12 mana 11/11, Trample Infect. Infect is an ability where the creature deals damage to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters, to players in poison counters. If a player has 10 or more poison counters, they immediately lose the game. With 11, just 1 hit from him is enough to kill them. Xenagos generally brings it to 22. At that point, oftentimes your opponent doesn't have enough toughness among their blockers to prevent all the infect damage from going through. And if you'd be put into your graveyard from everywhere, he shuffles back in. He doesn't shuffle the graveyard, but he does just shuffle himself if he does hit your graveyard. And that's Xenagos. His weaknesses are mostly that you do kind of kill players one at a time unless you have Craterhoof and Avenger out, which isn't something you can rely on all the time. Generally you are killing people one by one. You can usually knock out the first player, and then the second and third player are going to realize what you're doing and may very well team up to try to kill you. Overall though, it's a very fun deck. It's aggressive, but it does have late game plans, and its strengths are mostly also in its resiliency. Being able to draw a lot of cards later on, being able to get your dead creatures back from either Eldrazi hitting the graveyard and they shuffle in, you can get them again, or just having Genesis in your graveyard or Eternal Witness to get cards back to your hand. It's a very strong commander, it's very fun. We will have a description of the deck just in the description area. Thanks for watching, and we will see you guys in the next video. Bye.